Vince Simpson hasn't been able to be here today. He's the guy from CBRE, fit-out specialist. It's a real shame he can't be here, but he's had to go back to the UK for various reasons. Robert Geoffrey Fairbanks III, our resident huge bundle of energy and workspace expert and everything else, doing lots of interesting things at Bloomberg. He may well appear in a huge bundle of energy part of the way through. I mean, he should be from the start. I don't know quite where he is. But anyway, three of us are here, and we've made it.
Yeah, I guess we're the scraps.
Yeah. I should say we're giving away prizes. If they didn't get here, they'd forfeit their prize. But anyway, there you go. So I think we'll kick off, shall we? Well, to my left is Dale Bottcher, who is Executive Vice President of Global Sales and Marketing at AVI-SPL. Their company's been through an interesting period of corporate movement this past week. And to his left is the vastly experienced Mr. Simon Truby, who is Senior Audiovisual Designer stroke Project Manager. I don't know quite how to call you really, from CBI.
Thank you.
So, I mean, how do you refer to a guru? But there you go. Right, now we've been into, we thought this time, a lot of guff's been spoken about workspaces. What are they, what do they do, what fits in them? But very little has been said about what the business thinks of them. If you're designing an environment, a working environment, and the workspace itself, what does the C-suite, what the guys running the company think they want out of it, and how does it benefit the business? I mean, a lot of it's been geared to employees and what they need and the environment they best work in, and how creative they can be in an environment that's more conducive to them, and how functional that environment is, whether it works or not. And that's all very well and good, and it's great. It's worked sometimes. It failed spectacularly at Apple over the past year. We wouldn't have heard much about that. And it was Johnny Ive's parting gifts, who was head of workspace development, and some of his top designers went nuts being put into a new environment and rebelled big time. That's been kept rather quiet. So, workspace development with your top creatives and top talent can equally go spectacularly wrong as it can succeed. It's a difficult thing to do. But if the top manager of the board feel is it something they feel is a move they need to go through, or is it tied to what they want to achieve and do as a company? So shall we start with that? I mean, what connection does workspace development have with, how high does it go up in a company? Is it relatively local level? You get an architect in and say, right, moving into a new building, we need to design it like so. My own building has been the same thing. We've moved to a spanking new building from a complete derelict hole, I would refer to it, and everybody's perked up and the whole workforce has improved, become more productive, is a different group of people. So it can be fantastic. Is that what companies are after, do you think, or is there something more? Is it still a very fundamental thing to do?
From my point of view, yes. I mean, the engaging architects, etc., to look at workspaces and what they want to do from a C-suite down is really about the ratios of work patterns and using surveys to see what they're working at that point. It's very difficult at the moment, I think, that the big data is not there as to how it is actually being used and what the future point is and where the company wants to go. I think that's the little bit of a gap that's there at the moment, in that we're reacting to what they're doing today, making a few changes to what they want to do in the future. But from a technology point of view, a lot of the spaces and a lot of the way that they're functioning is already designed by the engagement of the vision, not necessarily that we're involved in that vision to be able to create a more flexible, well, it is becoming more flexible, but a totally flexible workspace for what effectively the staff want. And the other thing is that, from a C-suite down, they work in very different ways to the actual, I'm going to say staff on the ground, but actually at every level they work in very different ways. So the tools change throughout the business, which makes it a very difficult thing just to put, one broad stroke on how a business should design a new workspace and develop it going forward. That's the big bit where actually technology can come to the forefront, I think, where we should actually be putting in procedures and ways to actually do some pre-strategy, some advice in the forefront to be able to help that with technology to actually show trends show how people are using the spaces and the technology, and advise of where actually sometimes it's just that the technology is there and people don't use it in the best way that's possible. The amount of times that I go into new buildings and I see big boardrooms with one person on a conference call and then another room that's built for 6 and there's 10 people squashed in there because they just simply don't have the control over the workspace and the technology that's there to be able to make it the best value for what they bought.
How do integrators see it? Are they into measurement and a bit of thinking behind the kit?
Yeah, I think more than ever now, workplaces are being built to first sort of support the workflow and processes and the agility of the work, the work environment. So sort of purpose built to best support the needs of the employees. When you look at it today, kind of 3 areas. You have your traditional office, you have your remote workplace employees, but then the third place, if you will, coffee shops and wherever people are working. But to be able to build spaces that are flexible and allow for choice by your employees is sort of the foundational thinking that we're seeing from a lot of the corporate real estate trends and the focus on the space. But it's very strategic for a lot of reasons. One, retain talent is huge. It's sort of an absolute need to have now versus a nice to have in terms of a space that functions and encourages the right collaboration and optimization of the workflow, if you will. And then I think to obviously get the most out of your teams from an agility perspective, I think it's critical. And so I think more organizations are realizing that, and some have already gone down this open workplace concept, and maybe they went down it for the wrong reasons originally, but then are kind of looking at this with now more and more data becoming available to help with the business decisions moving forward.
Is it being thought of more as a tool by the senior management then, as to say, well, we're looking at really how the employees, our employees work, how we're thinking of setting up the business globally, and where we can work in one way, one country, we can't do perhaps in another. The workforce is different. It likes to work in different ways. It may be more mobile. It may be this, that, and the other. Do they think about their staff as strategically as, say, well, we used to think HR did, but it's a bigger, higher level issue than just basically kitting out a nice new office? Is there anything? I know the pharmaceutical companies do. They try to do the Apple model of mixing previously siloed, individual departments, like Apple originally did. So they'd become multidisciplinary. They thought they'd mix different people together. That's where the breakthroughs in the innovation new drug research would come from, and they've therefore completely restructured the internal workspace of their company. I think one of the big pharmaceutical in East Anglia is doing it in the UK. That seemed to be quite radical thinking to me. Now, you need management to think along those lines, not just to the fitter. I wonder how widespread that would be in other industries. I mean, you can see it in some where they're making an awful lot of money out of new drugs. They have to innovate, and a lot of them are coming up for renewal, and they're becoming less and less effective. And actually keeping that cycle going is not an easy thing to do. So it's the traditional individual departments are now becoming much more open and multidisciplinary, working between each other as different people. That's difficult enough as it is.
It is, and I think each situation is different
hence
as well.
Apple,
if it's a large organisation where they're doing multiple buildings, they learn from the last one, but it's a big investment for a single occupation business as well, or very, very few where they're signing long leases and they're building spaces to do that, to cross-pollinate, let's say, the different departments to get the benefit out of their workforce. We are seeing more of that coming in. We are seeing more of the C-suite looking at that capability of bringing different departments or different areas of the business that could support and build extra bits. And I think that's coming out of the vision side of things. And I think that's where what we need to be doing, and what potentially as an industry we've got an opportunity to do, is get on the forefront of that and really provide that information to benefit those decisions, rather than it being either a feeling driven or an emotional decision. We need data to
Data
make
supported,
it absolutely
decisions.
and that is where the integrators potentially have got a big market opening for those type of professional services to support decisions and real feedback on how the business works and the technology works within that. And I think that's where the view of it not just being a project but it being a life cycle. If you can build a building with technology, that means that in 6 months' time you review what you've done. In a year's time you review what you've done, and you can subtly make the changes, but you've got the information there that is really going to give you the information to make decisions and make those changes. Your investment becomes not just that one investment that you're looking at over a period of 5 years for technology, say, before main technology needs to be replaced, but actually now you're looking at, well, maybe we need to budget a bit year 2, year 3, so that we can actually be flexible in the space that we're working in to be able to support the developing pieces. The other thing that we see a lot is you build a new building, you put people in there, and they work differently because of the space that they're now in. And you can't foresee some of that.
Right.
And that's why you need that information.
Well, it's becoming a more living, breathing environment, so it seems. But we've sort of touched on, Google are probably a good exponent of this. They test their own technology, obviously, more collaborative, and they start experimenting with the huddle rooms that are temporary, some are permanent. They dismantle them, put together, they strip them bare and only use the technology. They say just populate space with technology you need to use. And which is all well and good, it happens to a certain level. However, we've now gotten to the level, especially with senior boards involved, where you have to start thinking how intelligent. We had a whole I'd probably shoot myself in the foot by saying this. We had a whole conference on smart buildings up the road. And arguably, you could actually say there isn't anything smart buildings don't exist. It's clever automation. But where we find probably more benefit is the intelligence within it. Mm-hmm. And as buildings become more, as we understand how to get the best out of the buildings to support our workspaces, then you're starting to expect a certain kind of intelligence being embedded within the fabric of the building. And that, in my view, is when it becomes smart, because it's starting to interact with the people until you've got this IoT, Internet of Things you've probably heard of, devices in the fabric layer. Yeah. You're seeing things like Intel's Ignite layer and other sort of small platform layers underneath that provides that basic level of functionality and intelligence. It may be AI-driven, ultimately it's currently machine learning, which starts to do clever basic processes well, on top of which you potentially could put your AV. AV at its best is invisible. You walk into a room and knows who you are, and God knows what, years away from that, really. Yeah. But, how far away do you agree with that scenario? Am I being a bit pie in the sky here, or
no,
what do you think?
If I can
absolutely.
jump off of that. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think we're seeing sort of this idea of, well, if you look at just the meeting spaces, for example, the data and analytics that are available today around sort of the space itself, the people, the users, and then the technology. But those, the data that you're harvesting can then be used to help manage the life cycle upgrades, to continue to hone the program and provide actionable business intelligence and data to base decisions on, to show, hey, this is working, or this piece of equipment continues to fail, we're going to swap it out, or people are choosing this room for the view, not for the equipment that's in there, and really getting specific with the actual usage of the space. And the third piece around the people is the experience. And that seems to be the next sort of step here in terms of measuring the experience of the users and trying to feed that back into that cycle as well to, again, make business sort of data-supported decisions.
Sorry, Simon.
No, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree with that. It's that business piece, because at the end of the day, what we've got to remember is what they want these spaces for is to make things quicker, easier, to get on with the job and the task that they're there for. And the user experience means that it's enjoyable. You don't want to go and have to stress out at work. That's the point of it. Right. So all this information is about making the workflow quicker, easier, less time wasting, and then for the business and for the C-suite, it's more efficient, so they get more out of their employees. That is exactly what we're trying to get the technology to do. So that's why this whole piece has got to come in there.
Yeah, so cloud adoption or adoption services is really critical, but there's a term, it's got a lot of FUs in it, so I'll be careful, but FUMIFU, so first use must inspire future use. If people go into a space and it disrupts flow or they have trouble using the room, they're going to be less encouraged to use it moving forward, and we failed from a design or from an implementation perspective.
Who's measuring and monitoring the progress of all this? Is it the AV manager's role, or is there someone else at a level of HR? I mean, whose jurisdiction does it fall under?
Ultimately, that's where we failed. That's where we're failing at the moment.
Well,
it's ownership. Well, no, no. Okay, it's building on that, but that's where traditionally we failed then, in that the ownership piece is the key thing. Traditionally we've had a project. Project is with a team that have been put together because you don't want to disrupt business as usual. So it's put together with a team, it then hands over to business as usual, and that's where that whole vision of we need to monitor, we need to get the statistics back, and we pass it over to the business as usual team without the training, without that proper transfer piece, and actually without that life cycle view of a service, not just of the products, of that service piece around ensuring that in 6 months' time we're making sure that they're using it in the right way and have the training. That's what we really have. That's where the opportunity is, and it is getting better, absolutely getting better. But it's the piece that we need to make sure is enrolled in there, is that it's not a project, it's a continued piece of work that is a life cycle, and the ownership, whether it transfers in that life cycle or not, needs to be maintained so that there is always somebody there that is watching and monitoring and providing that feedback. To be honest, it needs to be at the AV level. Initially, but also with visibility up the chain, because ultimately, historically, C-suite would go, I don't want to know unless, I don't want to know, I only ever hear when there's problems. Realistically, we need to be telling them when it's successful, and that's what the statistics and the views are going to come back to do. Say when it's successful, and therefore gain more funding in the right spaces because of it. Because, everybody looks at AV and goes, oh, well, that's expensive, and then they'll go and spend a fortune on a boardroom table or a piece of furniture because the comparison is not there. It's always going to look pretty, whereas AV's it's got a life cycle to it. We need to change the view of where the funding and where the actual expenditure is and the return on that investment because of it.
But I think more than ever now, our space, the AV world, is managed by IT. And they look at it from a device perspective or systems perspective, but also sort of the view that they have is, uptime, if you will, but it is really focused on the device level. But now there are roles in many companies or organizations around the user experience. So somebody owns that user experience role for the company, and that's coupled with the device information is critical. Are we building the right type of spaces, equipping them with the right type of equipment to meet the needs of the business and the employees, and are they responding the right way?
How interactive are these spaces going to become? I mean, Workspace at the moment they can be very, very bland. They can be filled in with appropriate technology for how it's being used. But how interactive, how intuitive is the technology going to have to become? Is it going to become intuitive, interactive? I mean, it's a big thing, interactive, in what we're covering. It's a question of, which is what AV should be doing very well now anyway. How far do you think that will go in workspace development? That's something you have to take into account?
I think what you just said there actually was the appropriate level of intuitive interaction. That's the key thing, and that's where, from a product base, they need to cater for quite a wide range of capabilities in terms of the end user. From a design perspective, it needs to be appropriate for the people that are going to be using it. So you need to make it, the same experience that they're experiencing other technologies in the workspace that they're using, whether that be on their personal device, on their phone, on their laptop. That same kind of. You don't have to go and click lots of buttons to be able to use your phone. You know where to go. That kind of driven piece is the key thing that you've got to work out as a workplace. How intuitive things need to be for the people that are using it? If you take the law sector, for example, they want very simple, walk into a room, touch a button, the system goes, and they can just use it for what they want to do, because every minute in a meeting room, a client meeting room for a law firm is money.
Yeah, billable.
It's billable, it's people around the table, it's an expensive thing to do if they then have to spend the first 10 minutes setting up, and it's embarrassing. You know, because potentially your client has got a better workplace than you. So, you know, you've got to make sure that it's the right level of interactive. Whereas you may take other spaces where they want to create a much more flexible space and have lots of interactive capability within the control to be able to do that. And that's the thing.
100%. We take a philosophy, if you just look at it as everybody here probably flew here, but a pilot, a co-pilot, or autopilot, just from a basic foundational approach to it. But yeah, based on the space, do you want to control every aspect of it in a pilot mode? Do you want some automation, or do you want it to, when you walk in, there's sensors that recognize motion and kick everything into gear without, you know, any button push? So I think it's important to understand that.
I mean, we haven't talked networking. We've got another session coming on for AV over IP, which is obviously bound to be fun. But networking is something that probably becomes more and more important when you're starting to centralize functionality and make everything available where you need to be made available. Suddenly brings in a whole level of complexity.
Yeah.
Are we geared up to evaluating that effectively, and what role will the integrators need to play to understand what's required for each client? You know, not the story, but the whole stuff around it, where it fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah, so I think the approach that we've taken is you start with sort of the outcomes or the experiences that the organization's trying to achieve, and then you build the spaces backwards in terms of, you know, meeting those needs. And not every space is the same, but certainly, you know, it's purpose built. But, you know, I see that as a, you know, a critical step in terms of the go forward approach to design, for sure. But for us, I think you're seeing more connected spaces. Technology is more capable these days, requiring less custom integration, if you will. But there is you said a little bit more complexity in terms of the extension of the desktop UC experience into the meeting spaces, and being able to make that experience pretty seamless and consistent from, you know, the desktop to the meeting space is really, I think, the role that, well, either currently or shortly here in the future, that a traditional AV integrator and now workplace services provider will really need to get their hands around.
Is that going to be a new title, do you reckon, workplace services provider, or something around that with a bigger picture environment? I mean, look at here, for example, a lot of vendors like Creston or whatever releasing agreements of ecosystems of products that they're selling now into certain environments, not selling individual technologies anymore. Well, they are, but not in the quite the way they were, calling themselves more IT-like companies. Ben Kramer's got a new CEO, for example. He's come from Digital Equipment and IBM, and they're talking about not kidding out workspaces, but looking at digital transformation programs, which is a word very familiar in IT, but unheard of in AV. So you see the companies starting to think how they should change themselves, but, you know, to meet a new business model that they have to deal with, which clearly engages the top level executives in the company, probably talks their language a bit.
It does, absolutely. And the thing that's changing with that is, you mentioned that IT and AV now are working simultaneously. They are the same thing to a certain extent, basically. But I think what it does is, as a project base and a delivery point, it's actually moved the roles and responsibilities quite considerably within the client's environment. That's where the opportunity is, because peripheral side of things, then IT departments know that, no problem at all. Networking side of things, there is a piece where they're building a platform. They are building a platform to cope with all this type of traffic that's going over there, and from a C-level suite, they're looking at it and going, well, that's the cost of our network. We need that for our business. That's fine, no problem at all. The gap is what's required to deliver AV over that piece, and understanding what's there already. If it's an existing client that's got an existing network, how does the AV fit onto that? Or monitoring what a new network needs to look like to go to that. I think that sort of overlap and the RACI profile for an integrator is changing now, that they can guide the internal client IT team to support that. And I think that's the biggest opportunity. As you say, it's a workplace delivery solution. Is not now a fit-out solution, when it traditionally was. It's a very much interactive with the overlap into the client team, which it hasn't been quite so much before. You'd always put down your requirements, and that'd be it, and then you'd expect that from them. And then when it doesn't quite work, it then delays the project, it creates issues and things like that. I think now the integrators need to be involved and overlapping the IT departments to support that process.
That's very interesting.
Not just handing over the information.
Do they have the skills and the staff and approach to do that, Dale?
I think so, but if you're trying to go at it the same way that you were 10 years ago, 5 years, I'll even say 3 years ago, with the same systems and processes that, in terms of the engineering and the processes to support sort of how you would spec and roll out equipment and discuss and, the technology with your customers, I think you're in big trouble. It's absolutely now focused on those business outcomes and experiences and on those, that digital transformation around the collaboration suite.
It opens the market, of course, to managed services, doesn't it? Which is where we all think
Massively.
the industry is mainly going.
Massively.
Would you like to ask any questions at all? Anything that sort of stimulated your little grey cells that you thought you might want to pursue? Please do. Hello.
Here we go.
I'm just about to see you in
Looking forward to this.
in the dark mist. Go on. Far away.
On. I spec loads of them. First time I've actually used one, so this is quite
well.
good. As we move to a more software-defined environment and there are more features being released by Microsoft, Zoom, Cisco, seen a great demo today of a Samsung Flip with a Cisco WebEx working brilliantly. Is it okay as a designer to admit maybe 6 months ago you didn't know that existed and you got it wrong, and sorry, Mr. Customer, you've just bought into a meeting fit-out suite that you thought was going to last for 10 years, and all of a sudden some software house has released something that is perfect for your workflow, but we didn't know about it at the time, so we couldn't incorporate it?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And this is a problem that we've had traditionally as well, because technology moves so fast. I think the way that projects are, well, we would advise projects are looked at are very different, which is infrastructure first. Let's look at the infrastructure and the environment first of all in the design process, then fit out the last products. What you don't want to do is go bleeding edge. You want to go cutting edge. You want to make sure that you've got the absolute stability within there, which means proof of concept is critical within the design process. But I think the challenge, and we've had discussions on this with architects and the traditional project team, is that they're after information very, very early on what the fit-out's going to look like, and we don't want to commit to it because we want that exact experience piece to be looked at, and products are moving along very, very quickly at the same time. It's something that is going to develop, I think, and I think in terms of us as an industry within that project environment, we need to really determine how our timeline goes against it, because the project environment runs against REBA. We almost need a technology path for that will allow us to make late decisions on technology or infrastructure decisions, which means that actually you might be buying technology within the last few months of a project, not in the first few, because that's when a fit-out contract is bringing in an AV integrator. Yeah. And I think that's very much like the network side of things as well. So if you're fitting out a new building, you're delivering a network, you design the infrastructure around the network and you buy the products very late, because actually the lead times are a lot quicker. And these new products out to market, the huddle rooms, those type of things, are designed to be a real light installation. That's the whole point of it, not the traditional one. 3 months of installation, first fix, and everything like that. It's about building that environment, as we said, to be flexible and making sure that the product selection is the right thing at the right time within that process cycle.
I think also that everything's spot on, but a really strong partnership between end user, client, designer, and the partner of choice in terms of the integration firm too.
Yeah. And some of that is actually just telling people about the timeline. Yeah. That's communication, and not just following the track that we've been put on. It's about communication when we're going to make that decision. But absolutely, it happens all the time, unfortunately. You go down the process of designing a solution, coming out with a technology, a delivery for what they want now. And actually, that's where I was saying earlier, the life cycle and the review process is the key thing, because you are going to always deliver a project that within about 3 months of you actually putting it in there, something new is going to come out that may change the world. And it's such a difficult thing from us, but that's why we, from our point of view, from my company, we look for that return process to make sure that we're monitoring and getting best usage out of it. And it may bring down the life cycle of the products that we have put in there because something better has come out that will change things for that end user.
Right, we've run out of time, sadly, but did that answer your question a bit? I mean, it's quite a good, that's a brilliant question, actually.
It's very brilliant.
Everybody's worst scenario, isn't it? We wonder how fit for purpose these rebus stages were when you have to go back on the technology, and it's their top problem they have. Some of the stages around us don't actually work,
Absolutely, and I'm in the middle of it now, where they're saying, well, 2 years ago we were told 2 network ports in our meeting room was enough. And that's what we put our ITT for our M&E out and everything,
Yeah.
and now you're coming back saying you want 6?
Yeah.
And I go,
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, you need 6. And
Yeah.
Nightmare, isn't it?
Yep.
Right. I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
I have to be rude blue because I had a mental block then for a moment. Simon and Dale, thank you so much.
Thank you very
and thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.